you can see the uppermost fibers marked as dendrites. They are there to receive the information from other parts or other neurons basically, which lie in other parts of the body, right? And then that information travels to the cell body, where the nucleus is there. It is marked nucleus. It is present in the cell body. Basically, cell body is like any other cell which contain all the cell organelles and help in its functioning. After that, there is a long fiber called axon, which receives the signal from cell body and transmits the impulse further to the nerve ending. So basically, these are the functions. Dendrite receives signals, as I already explained. Then cell body, also known as soma, contain nucleus and other cellular components. Axon carries the information from the cell body, and axon terminal. At the end, there are axon terminals which finally transmit the signals to other neurons. There is one interesting fact that neurons are one-way channels of communication. They receive the information from dendrites and transmit it through axon. So it is a one-way channel. Okay. And also, human brain contains more than 100 billions of neurons. To explain further, there is one more diagram explaining the details of the diagram. There are a myelin sheath. As you can see, axon has a covering, a green colored or blue colored covering called a myelin sheath. And in between the gaps of myelin, there are nodes of Renwier. Right? So myelin sheath is basically composed of fatty material which provides insulation and also speeds up the signal conduction. The nerve impulse or the signal which travels throughout the axon get insulated, get protection by a myelin sheath, which further enhances the speed of signal conduction. And there is one more interesting fact, that if there is any damage to myelin sheath, then there is a disease called multiple sclerosis is caused, where a person faces jerky and uncoordinated movements. Then when I told you about rods of Renwier, which are the gaps in myelin sheath, they actually recharge the signal as it travels along the axon. Then there is one more important component called glial cells. Glial cells is derived from a Greek word which means glue, to stick on. That's why the function of glial cells is to hold the neurons in place. Okay, so basically these are non-neuronal cells which provide nutrients, and the most important fact is production of myelin sheath is by glial cells only. It helps to form the blood-brain barrier. Blood-brain barrier is basically what? It is a barrier to protect your brain from invading pathogens, right? Then glial cells has one more important function, that it removes the dead neurons and other pathogens from the surrounding of neuron. So, to know it further, there are several types of glial cells. Few of them are here, like oligodendrocyte. As you can see here, basically its function is to form a myelin sheath, but in case of only central nervous system, and which I am going to explain in later, the types of nervous system. And there is one more Schwann cells. Its function is also to form myelin sheath, but in case of peripheral nervous system. Astrocytes, you can see they play a very important role as they maintain the chemical environment surrounding the neuron. Microglia are the immune cells of brain. Ependymal cell, the first picture you can see there, the ependymal cells are basically responsible for the production of cerebrospinal fluid, which